The relationship between the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, and the United Nations has grown increasingly strained. BRICS nations feel marginalized within a system they perceive as favoring Western interests. This dissatisfaction has led to calls for substantial reforms within the UN or the creation of alternative structures for global governance. The Security Council's veto system is seen as outdated and unrepresentative of the current global balance of power. This fuels frustration among BRICS members who seek greater influence in shaping global affairs. The growing rift between BRICS and the UN represents a significant challenge to the existing global order. At the heart of the BRICS discontent lies a fundamental imbalance of power within the UN system. This imbalance is most evident in the structure of the Security Council, where the 5 permanent members, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Russia and China, hold veto power. BRICS nations argue that the Security Council's composition no longer reflects the distribution of economic and political power in the world. Emerging economies like India, Brazil and South Africa, despite their growing global influence, lack a permanent seat at the table, limiting their ability to shape decisions on critical global issues. The dominance of Western nations within the UN extends beyond the Security Council. Key leadership positions within the organization, including the Secretary General and the heads of specialized agencies like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, have historically been held by individuals from Western countries. The BRICS bloc argues that this imbalance of power undermines the legitimacy and effectiveness of the UN. Beyond procedural concerns, BRICS nations have increasingly voiced their discontent with what they perceive as double standards within the UN system. They argue that the UN often applies different rules and expectations to Western nations compared to those from the Global South. This perceived bias undermines the organization's credibility and fuels accusations of hypocrisy. One area where this double standard is most apparent is in the realm of human rights. BRICS nations point to instances where Western countries escape censure for human rights violations that would draw condemnation if committed by developing nations. The issue of intervention in sovereign states also highlights this perceived double standard. The BRICS bloc argues that this perceived double standard undermines the legitimacy of the UN and erodes its effectiveness in promoting international cooperation. The economic anxieties of the Global South, particularly those within the BRICS bloc, represent another significant point of contention with the existing global order. These nations argue that the current system, dominated by Western-led institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, perpetuates a cycle of dependency and hinders their ability to achieve sustainable and equitable development. One key concern is the conditionality often attached to financial assistance and development aid. BRICS nations argue that these conditions, often driven by Western economic orthodoxies, can undermine their sovereignty and force them to adopt policies that prioritize debt repayment over social and economic development. Furthermore, BRICS nations criticize the structure of global trade, which they believe unfairly favors developed nations. The BRICS bloc advocates for a more equitable and just global economic order that empowers developing nations and gives them a greater say in shaping global economic rules. Section 5. A multipolar world in the making, geopolitical tensions and BRICS. The rise of BRICS coincides with a broader shift in the global balance of power. The unipolar moment, dominated by the United States in the aftermath of the Cold War, has given way to a more multipolar world, characterized by the emergence of new centers of power and influence. This shifting geopolitical landscape has heightened tensions and fueled competition among major powers. BRICS nations often perceive Western actions, such as sanctions and the formation of strategic alliances, as attempts to contain their growing influence and maintain Western hegemony. The formation of alliances like the Quad, United States, India, Japan and Australia, and AUKUS, Australia, United Kingdom and United States, is seen by some within the BRICS bloc as evidence of Western efforts to counter their growing influence. The BRICS nations advocate for a more inclusive and cooperative approach to global security that respects the interests of all nations, regardless of their size or ideology. Section 6. the green transition, climate change, and the needs of developing nations. Climate change represents one of the most pressing challenges facing humanity, requiring a collective global response. However, significant disagreements remain about how to address this issue fairly and effectively, particularly regarding the respective responsibilities of developed and developing nations. BRICS countries argue that global climate policies often fail to consider the unique challenges faced by developing nations. They argue that developed countries, historically responsible for the vast majority of greenhouse gas emissions, have a greater obligation to reduce their emissions and provide financial and technological assistance to developing nations. The BRICS nations advocate for a more equitable and just global climate regime that recognizes the developmental needs of developing countries. Section 7. A legacy of progress, a future uncertain, the evolution of the UN. Since 1945, the United Nations has shaped the post-World War II international order. The organization has evolved, adapting to changing global dynamics. Initially focused on peace and security, it played a crucial role in decolonization and conflict mediation. The UN's mandate expanded to development, human rights, and environmental protection. It achieved successes in eradicating smallpox, negotiating treaties, and providing humanitarian aid. Yet challenges like bureaucratic inefficiencies and great power politics persist. Section 8. Reimagining global governance, potential reforms and alternatives. The growing dissatisfaction with the existing global order, particularly among BRICS nations, has fueled calls for reform or even the creation of alternative structures for global governance. One frequently proposed reform is to expand the UN Security Council to include permanent members from Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Another proposal is to reform the voting procedures within the Security Council, potentially limiting or abolishing the veto power of permanent members. Beyond reforming existing institutions, some experts have proposed creating entirely new structures for global governance. These include a G20+ framework, building on the existing G20 and empowering regional organizations like the African Union, ASEAN, and the European Union to play a more prominent role in global governance. A democratic nations entity envisions a bicameral legislative system with one chamber representing governments and another composed of elected representatives accountable to the global populace. These proposals reflect a growing recognition that the current global order is unsustainable and requires fundamental change. Section 9. A fork in the road, the future of BRICS and the global order. The future trajectory of the BRICS bloc and its relationship with the existing global order remains uncertain. The bloc faces both internal and external challenges that will shape its evolution and influence on the world stage. Internally, the BRICS nations are a diverse group with varying political systems, economic models, and foreign policy objectives. Externally, the BRICS nations must navigate a complex and rapidly changing geopolitical landscape. The intensifying rivalry between the United States and China, coupled with ongoing conflicts and crises around the world, presents both challenges and opportunities for the bloc. The BRICS bloc has the potential to become a powerful force for change in the 21st century by leveraging their collective economic weight, demographic size, and growing geopolitical influence. Section 10. Toward a more just and equitable world. The imperative for change. The growing rift between BRICS and the West, epitomized by their disagreements within the UN system, reflects a deeper crisis of legitimacy facing the current global order. The existing system, built in the aftermath of World War II, is struggling to adapt to the realities of a multipolar world characterized by shifting power dynamics, rising inequality, and increasingly complex global challenges. Addressing this crisis requires a fundamental reassessment of global governance structures and a renewed commitment to multilateralism based on principles of fairness, equity, and shared responsibility. The international community must find ways to give greater voice to developing nations, address the concerns of marginalized communities, and promote a more inclusive and sustainable model of globalization. The future depends on our collective ability to build a more just, equitable, and sustainable global order that works for everyone, not just a privileged few.
So hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and let's turn the page on a new adventure together. Get ready to experience books like never before, only on VBook 360. Like, comment, and share to support the channel and keep the video magic alive. Thank you for stopping by. And remember, every video has a story, and every story deserves to be shared. See you in the next video.